Imagine a boy, just 12 years old, quietly clutching his sketch pad on a crowded airplane. A simple act, drawing clouds, heroes, dreams. But in the eyes of one flight attendant, that boy became a threat. What happens when fear and prejudice override compassion? When a harmless pen becomes a weapon, and a child's life is shattered in an instant? This is the story of Micah Benton, a boy whose innocence was violently pierced by a moment of blind hatred and a system desperate to hide the truth. How far will those in power go to silence the voice of a child? How does a family find strength in the face of injustice? And what does it take for a community to rise? Not just for one boy, but for every person who's ever been marginalized, set aboard a plane that became a battleground of dignity and fear. This story will take you through the raw, unfiltered moments of pain, courage, and the relentless fight for justice. You'll meet those who refuse to look away and discover how one small voice can ignite a movement. If you believe no child should suffer such cruelty, hit like, share this story, and subscribe to our channel. Join us now as we unravel the truth behind the pen that changed everything. The seatbelt sign hadn't even come on yet. Micah Benton sat in 9A, window seat, gripping his sketchbook so tightly the paper began to curl under his fingers. He was 12 years old, long-limbed and quiet, with soft brown eyes that held more silence than most adults knew what to do with. His hoodie sleeves covered his wrists. His backpack was tucked beneath the seat in front of him, and his digital pen rested in his right hand like it belonged there, beside him. His 16-year-old sister Avery adjusted the zipper on her hoodie and checked on Micah for the third time in a minute. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her presence was loud in all the ways her voice never tried to be. "You good?" she finally asked under her breath, her eyes scanning the cabin like a hawk. Micah nodded. "Barely." In the row behind them, Isaiah Boone, their uncle and legal guardian, folded his jacket and tucked it into the overhead bin. He was a tall man with a steady jaw, soft hands hardened by work, and eyes that carried too many stories he never told. He hadn't flown in years, hated the air, hated the idea of being trapped mid-sky, where no one could leave and nothing could be undone. But Micah wanted to fly. Micah had begged him. "I just want to see the clouds," he'd said. "I want to draw them while we're up there." And Isaiah had said yes, because boys like Micah didn't ask for much. Not after the year they'd had. Not after losing their mother in May. Not after moving schools. Not after watching Micah go quiet in ways that scared everyone but the boy himself. So here they were, Flight 227 from Denver to Boston, a 2-hour trip. Boarding had been slow, clunky. A mother with a crying infant, a man with a laptop bag who kept muttering about overhead space, a pilot that hadn't cracked a smile since the first call for boarding. But none of that mattered, not to Micah, because for the first time in months, he had something to look forward to that didn't start with pain. He stared out the small oval window, watching the tarmac bustle below. Fuel trucks, luggage carts, a man waving neon sticks in practiced patterns. He wanted to draw it all, the movement, the symmetry, the chaos made graceful. He uncapped his stylus. Then everything shifted. A voice crackled over the speaker, calm, polite, practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Sky North Flight 227. We'll be pushing back shortly. Please make sure all carry-on items are stowed and seatbelts are fastened." The flight attendant who spoke wasn't the smiling type. His name tag read Frankie Mallon, mid-40s, crisp shirt, crooked tie, skin like porcelain and lips pressed too tight. He moved down the aisle with the kind of precision that made children shrink and adults pretend to be asleep. He stopped at row 9, stared at Micah, paused too long, then nodded once, like checking off a box in his mind, and moved on. Micah's fingers curled around the stylus a little tighter. Avery noticed. "What's wrong, nothing." He looked down at his sketchbook and began drawing the wing outside the window. Smooth lines, bold shadows. He tried to forget about the stare, tried not to hear the whisper. Frankie leaned into another flight attendant near the exit row and muttered something Micah couldn't hear. But he saw the nod, saw the way they both glanced back toward row 9, saw the way their mouths didn't smile. Isaiah caught it too. From behind, he sat straighter, cleared his throat, didn't say anything. Because what could you say? Micah kept drawing. His stylus moved slowly. The lines didn't curve the way they usually did. The intercom beeped again. "We are ready for final cabin check. Please stay seated." Frankie returned, this time holding a clipboard. He didn't look at Avery, didn't look at Isaiah. He looked at Micah. "Put that pen away." Micah blinked. It's not a pen," he said softly. "It's for my tablet. It's digital." Frankie's voice didn't change. "It's a pen. Put it away." Avery tensed beside him. "It's not a threat." Frankie's eyes snapped to her. "I didn't say it was. I said put it away." Isaiah rose from his seat behind them, calmly, carefully, like stepping into water that might turn to fire. "Sir," he said evenly, "he's just drawing. We made sure everything's stowed. There's no issue here." Frankie didn't blink. "Stay seated," he said. Isaiah froze, and so did Micah. The stylus slipped between his fingers, fell, tapped against the floor. Frankie stared at it, then walked away. Not a word, not a nod, just silence. Micah bent slowly to pick it up. His fingers trembled as he clutched it to his chest. He didn't understand why the man had looked at him that way, why the air felt colder now, why the drawing suddenly felt dangerous. Avery placed her hand over his. "Don't let him make you shrink," she whispered. Micah nodded again, barely. The plane began to move. Outside, the world blurred. Inside, something quiet had already cracked open, and none of them knew it yet. But this would be the last drawing Micah would make for a long, long time. Micah had never been this close to the sky before. 30 seconds into takeoff, the ground disappeared beneath them, shrinking like something embarrassed to be seen. Buildings became blocks, cars became toys, and the clouds opened like soft gates. He should have felt wonder. He didn't. He felt like something was sitting on his chest. Avery leaned closer, whispering near his shoulder. "Breathe through your nose, like Mom taught us." Micah nodded. She said Mom like it didn't still sting. The seatbelt sign blinked above them. Still on. The cabin shook lightly. The engines purred and rumbled. The view was beautiful. But Micah kept his head down. His sketchbook sat closed in his lap, his stylus tucked away. Frankie Mallon hadn't looked at them since takeoff, but that didn't stop the feeling, that knowing, like a camera was pressed to your skin. Isaiah Boone sat behind them, trying not to make anything worse by trying too hard. He knew how this game worked. He'd played it all his life. The more they stayed quiet, the more they followed rules, the harder it was to be blamed when someone decided to lie. But this felt different. Something about that look, that stare. Micah twisted the cuff of his sleeve between his fingers. Something about that man made the air feel sharp, like breathing through thorns. Avery tapped the armrest gently. "Want to draw?" she asked softly. Micah didn't move. Then slowly, like asking permission from the air itself. He opened his sketchbook. The page was still blank. He picked up the stylus again, but the lines came out wrong, shaky, uneven. He tried to sketch the curve of the wing outside, but the line broke halfway through. He erased it, tried again. Still wrong. He wasn't drawing the clouds anymore. He was drawing the man's eyes. Cold, narrow, heavy with something Micah didn't have the words for yet. He looked up and saw Frankie again, just past the galley, restocking the drink cart. The attendant next to him, a younger woman with a ponytail and nervous shoulders, whispered something too soft to hear. Frankie's laugh was dry, clipped. Then he looked up, right at Micah, and smiled. Micah looked down fast. That wasn't a kind smile. That was the kind of smile you see right before something gets broken. Avery saw it too. Her whole body tensed. She looked back at Isaiah, her eyes saying what her mouth didn't dare. Did you see Isaiah gave the smallest nod? Yeah. He saw. The drink cart rolled down the aisle. The tension followed like smoke. Frankie passed by, rows 6, 7, 8. Stopped at theirs. Drink, he asked flatly. Micah hesitated. Apple juice. Frankie blinked once, didn't move, then said too loudly, "We're out." The cart had at least 4 cartons in plain sight. Micah's mouth opened, closed. Avery leaned forward. "I saw some in the—" "We're out," Frankie snapped, louder. The man across the aisle looked up. Isaiah unbuckled his seatbelt halfway. "Don't," Avery mouthed. Isaiah froze. Frankie didn't take his eyes off Micah. Micah didn't ask again. "Water." "Then," he mumbled. Frankie poured it too fast, the plastic cup sloshing, a few drops splashing onto Micah's sketchbook. "Oops," he said, with a smirk that didn't match the word. Micah's hand darted to protect the page. The line smeared. Frankie kept moving. The next passenger asked for ginger ale. Frankie gave it to him with a smile. Micah stared at the wet paper. Avery pulled tissues from her bag, helped dab the page. It didn't help much. Micah didn't say anything, just kept blotting. But the damage had already soaked through. The sketch was ruined, and suddenly, so was the sky. He closed the book, slipped the stylus into his hoodie pocket, folded his hands in his lap. Avery watched him carefully. "You okay?" she whispered. Micah didn't look up. He just nodded, even though he wasn't. Behind them, Isaiah Boone sat with his fists curled just out of sight. He'd flown in the military once, 25 years ago. He remembered the way white officers smiled at you when cameras were around, the way they smiled differently when you were alone. He had forgotten that smile until today. Frankie's smile brought it all back. And now, he sat here, 30,000 feet up, watching the same sickness pass between generations. But Isaiah knew the rules. He knew the stakes. Any wrong move, even a raised voice, and it'd be their names on the headline, not the man's. He reached forward, gently touching Avery's shoulder. "Just keep eyes forward," he murmured. Avery blinked hard. She hated this, hated swallowing what should have been shouted. But she nodded. The seatbelt sign turned off. Ding. People unbuckled. Some stood. Some stretched. Micah stayed still. His body curled tighter into the seat. A shadow passed over them. Frankie again. He wasn't pushing a cart this time. Just walking. Slowly. Deliberately. He stopped by row 9. Looked down. "Tablet out again?" he asked. Micah froze. His hands were empty. "No, sir," he said quietly. Frankie raised an eyebrow. "Then what's in your hoodie?" Micah's hand moved instinctively to the pocket. "The stylus." "Just my pen," he said. "I mean stylus. It looks like a pen." Micah didn't answer. Avery sat up straighter. "So what if it is?" Frankie turned to her. "Is there a problem here?" Avery's voice stayed even, but her eyes flashed. "You're making one." Frankie leaned closer. Too close. "Passenger in 9A," he said aloud, his voice carrying over the cabin. "Possible non-compliant item." Passengers began looking around. Micah shrank into his seat. "What's happening?" someone murmured. Isaiah rose again. This time he stood fully. "Hey," he said, his voice sharp now. "Step back." Frankie straightened, smirked. "Sir, please remain seated." Isaiah didn't blink. "Step back." The younger flight attendant came hurrying from the galley. "Everything okay? Mr. Mal and Frankie didn't look away. Then finally, he stepped back. "We'll follow up," he said coolly. He walked away again. Micah was shaking now, tiny tremors in his shoulders. Avery wrapped both arms around him. He buried his face in her sleeve. Isaiah sat back down, hands trembling with rage he could not use. The man across the aisle was filming now. Low, discreet. The tension in the cabin was a cloud. Thick, quiet, like something coming. And high above the world, inside that metal bird, no one realized that in less than 20 minutes, someone would scream, and the sound would change everything. The hum of the cabin felt almost soothing, the kind of sound you don't notice until it's gone. Micah sat still in his seat, knees drawn inward, chin tucked against his chest. He hadn't said a word since the last encounter. Not to Avery, not to Isaiah, not even to himself. Avery watched him closely. She didn't like the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. She didn't like the way his shoulders hunched down like he was trying to disappear. Isaiah stayed silent. But every now and then, he looked up toward the front of the plane, toward Frankie Mallon, toward the man who had turned a child with a stylus into a walking suspicion. The cabin lights dimmed. They were preparing for descent. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker, warm but rehearsed, like he'd said the same words 1,000 times, without ever really hearing them. Flight attendants resumed aisle checks, seat backs upright, tray tables stowed. Frankie made his way down again. Isaiah's fingers tapped a slow rhythm against the seat's armrest. He didn't like the way Frankie walked. Not the pace, not the posture. It was purposeful, targeted. Frankie paused at row 9. Again. Micah looked up, caught in the sudden shadow. Frankie's eyes scanned the boy, then narrowed at the stylus resting on Micah's lap. "You were told to stow that," he said flatly. Micah fumbled. I forgot." Frankie reached forward. Avery moved first. "Don't touch him." Frankie froze, looked at her, then back at the stylus. "I'm taking it for safety protocol." "It's not a weapon," Avery said, her voice sharper now. "I'll decide what's a threat," Frankie snapped. Isaiah stood from his seat before thinking, "You don't get to make that call." Frankie's hand moved faster than anyone expected. He snatched the stylus. Micah yelped. Not in pain, just shock. But Frankie didn't stop. He didn't pocket it. He didn't hand it to the crew. He held it up like it was something filthy, something dangerous. Then he said it, loud enough for 2 rows to hear. "I've had enough of this attitude." Micah looked up, eyes wide. Avery stood, placing herself between her brother and the aisle. Frankie stepped forward. Isaiah shouted, "Don't you lay a hand on him!" But it was already happening. In one sharp, brutal motion. Frankie leaned past Avery, gripped Micah's shoulder, and jabbed the cap stylus hard into the side of the boy's neck. The cabin didn't react at first. Not right away, because it didn't look real. It looked too fast, too quiet. Micah gasped. Then his body jolted, and then the blood came. Thick, immediate, dark red spreading across the collar of his hoodie. A slow moan escaped his throat, but it wasn't a scream. It was a wet, choking gurgle, the sound of air trying to escape through pain. And just like that, the silence was gone. Avery screamed. Isaiah lunged forward. Micah's hands clutched at his neck, fingers pressing desperately against the wound. The stylus clattered to the floor, rolling beneath the seat. Chaos erupted. A woman across the aisle shouted, "He's bleeding!" A man stood and blocked the aisle, demanding someone call for help. Frankie stepped back, stunned at first, then quickly raised his hands. It was self-defense. He stammered. He moved. Suddenly, he looked like Isaiah, pushed past the row, grabbing a napkin from the drink cart and pressing it against Micah's neck. "Call the captain," he shouted. Frankie didn't move. He just stood there, frozen. Micah slumped forward into Isaiah's arms. Avery dropped to her knees beside them. "Stay with me," she whispered, over and over. A stream of blood dripped onto the aisle carpet. Frankie looked around. No support, no backup, just faces, passengers watching, recording, staring, disbelieving. A young man near row 11 turned his phone inward to his chest and whispered to the screen, "We are on Sky North 227. A flight attendant just stabbed a kid. It's all here. I got it." Still streaming. His name was Jasper Rhys, a second-year law student who never expected his ethics class to feel this real. He watched the boy bleed, watched the man step back, watched the young girl try to stop something that couldn't be stopped with bare hands. The intercom crackled. "We're experiencing a delay in cabin service due to a medical emergency. Please remain seated. No further information. No requests for a doctor. Just instructions to stay quiet." Micah's blood soaked through the napkins. His lips turned pale. Avery pressed her hands over Isaiah's, trying to stop the bleeding. He was fading, drifting, eyes fluttering, breath coming in shallow gasps. A flight nurse finally appeared from the back, pushing through passengers. She dropped to her knees beside Micah. "Sweetheart, I need you to stay with me," she said, voice trembling. She applied pressure. Too much, then too little. The towel slipped twice. Isaiah's jaw clenched. His voice cracked for the first time. "Don't let him die." The nurse didn't answer. The descent had begun. Too fast. Too loud. The hum of the plane grew into a roar. Micah's body began to shake. Tiny spasms, then stillness. The nurse shouted toward the cockpit, "We need to land now." But there was nowhere to go. They were in the sky. Micah's eyes rolled back. Avery sobbed. The stylus still lay beneath the seat, cold, harmless, nothing more than a tool, but in the wrong hands, even the quietest thing can cut. And far above the earth, where truth can't run and time moves in slow motion, a boy bled in front of 100 strangers, none of whom would ever be the same again. The plane had never felt this quiet, not even when they first took off. Now the only sounds were soft cries, the dull whine of the engines, and the labored breaths of a boy losing blood in row 9. Micah Benton's hoodie was soaked through, his neck wrapped in layers of torn cloth, paper towels, and shaking hands. His face had gone pale, the kind of pale that made people panic, the kind that meant the body was running out of time. Isaiah Boone held pressure against the wound, trying to be steady, trying not to scream. His eyes stayed locked on his nephew's chest, counting every shallow rise, Avery sat on the floor beside him, gripping Micah's wrist like she could keep his pulse steady just by not letting go. Her lips trembled. Her voice had stopped working. The nurse knelt beside them, muttering, "Stay with me, sweetheart. Stay with me." Her hands were slick with blood. She kept slipping, kept adjusting, kept whispering things meant to reassure Micah, but maybe more to keep herself from breaking. In the row ahead, passengers had begun crying. A man held a baby tighter against his chest. A woman gripped her seat with both hands, staring straight ahead, like if she didn't look, it wasn't happening. And somewhere up front, behind the locked cockpit door, someone made a call. The plane banked slightly. A voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are making an expedited landing due to a medical emergency. Please remain seated, remain calm. No mention of what happened. No mention of the boy, or the blood, or the man who had done it." Frankie Mallon stood near the galley, face pale, eyes wide, arms folded across his chest. He looked like a man who had just realized he couldn't undo something. But the guilt didn't reach his voice. He kept saying the same thing. "He moved at me. I thought it was a weapon. He came at me. That's what I was trained to do." The younger flight attendant stood beside him, eyes darting between Frankie and the passengers watching from nearby rows. "You didn't have to stab him," she whispered. Frankie snapped. "I didn't stab him. I defended myself. You took it from his lap. I felt threatened. You took it from his lap." Her voice was flat now. A man 3 rows back filmed quietly over his shoulder. His hands shook, but he didn't stop. 2 minutes later, a supervisor's voice came through a discreet headset line. Valeria Dunn, gate supervisor at Logan International, was already preparing for landing, but not to help the child. "Start Protocol 3, she told the flight crew through the internal channel. "Secure devices. No footage off the aircraft." When the younger flight attendant hesitated, Valeria's voice sharpened. "Tell them it's for safety reasons. Standard security. Use the script." She repeated it again. "Use the script." In the cabin, crew began moving down the aisles, starting from the back. "Excuse me, sir. Are you recording? We'll need you to delete that footage. Company policy during in-flight emergencies." Passengers looked confused, angry. Some resisted, others caved. Phones disappeared into pockets. But one person didn't stop. Jasper Rhys was still filming from seat 11A, phone close to his chest, screen dimmed, voice low. He wasn't just recording, he was live, and his followers were watching. All 200-300 of them. The comment stream had exploded into chaos. "Wait, what the hell did that guy just do? Is that blood? He stabbed that kid with a pen? Why aren't they calling a medic? Are they deleting phones?" Jasper whispered to the camera. "This is Sky North Flight 227. A flight attendant assaulted a black child with a stylus. There is no threat. He was drawing, and now they're trying to erase it." Back near row 9, the nurse gave up on the napkins and reached into the med kit for gauze. "We need oxygen," she said. "Where is the mask?" Another passenger stepped forward. "I'm a firefighter. I can help." The nurse nodded. "Take his legs. Let's keep his airway open." Isaiah moved aside just long enough for the man to lift Micah's legs onto the seat, keeping his body elevated. The bleeding had slowed, but only because there was less left to lose. Micah's eyes fluttered. Avery bent closer. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're okay. Micah." But the words cracked in her throat. "He wasn't okay, and no one on this plane could fix that." The firefighter looked up toward the front. "We need paramedics at the gate. Tell the captain." "He already knows," the flight attendant said. "Then why aren't they saying it?" Frankie remained near the front, arms still crossed, looking smaller now. He hadn't been touched, hadn't been cuffed, hadn't even been separated from the rest of the crew. But Micah Benton, 12 years old, soft-spoken, artistic, black, bled in silence, just feet away. Avery turned to the nurse. "Is he going to die?" The nurse didn't answer. That was all Avery needed to know. She buried her face in Micah's chest, and for the first time since their mother died, she let the sobs come. Isaiah crouched beside them, one hand on her shoulder, the other cradling Micah's head. He had no words, only rage, only helplessness, only silence. The kind of silence that feels like a scream waiting for the right moment to break free. 10 minutes later, the wheels touched the ground. The tires screeched. The cabin jolted. Oxygen masks dangled slightly from the overhead compartments. The moment they taxied to the gate, there was movement, but not the kind they needed. 2 airport security officers stepped into the cabin, not medics. They spoke to the crew first, then headed straight toward Isaiah. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Isaiah stood slowly. "You need to help the boy first." One of the guards looked over. "Is he armed?" Avery's head snapped up, but another officer grabbed Isaiah's arm. "Sir, please cooperate." Passengers shouted. People stood. Someone yelled. He didn't do anything. That guy up front stabbed the kid. But the officers didn't stop. They pulled Isaiah toward the front of the cabin. Frankie stood to the side, still uncuffed, still untouched, still protected. As the paramedics finally boarded, Isaiah looked back one last time. Avery held Micah's hand, tears running down her cheeks. Micah wasn't conscious anymore. The mask had finally been placed on his face, but the blood remained. It trailed across the floor, smeared beneath shoes and carts, and the lies already taking root. In a matter of minutes, the world would know what happened, but only if the truth survived the landing, and right now, that was far from guaranteed. The ambulance doors flew open before the sirens stopped screaming. Micah Benton lay pale on the stretcher, his eyes closed, lips tinged blue, his neck wrapped in gauze that was no longer white. The paramedics wheeled him through the emergency entrance of St. Grant Memorial Hospital, shouting vitals over the hum of rubber wheels and metal rails. 12-year-old male, puncture wound to the lateral neck, suspected arterial injury, heavy blood loss, possible airway compromise. A nurse pushed open the trauma bay doors while a doctor barked instructions. "Saline, 2 IV lines. Clear the airway. Get an ultrasound on the throat. He's crashing. Let's go." Inside the waiting area, Avery Benton sat on a hard plastic bench, fists clenched in her lap. Blood still stained the sleeves of her hoodie. Her voice had long since left her. She hadn't stopped crying, but the tears came silently now, her whole body shaking under the weight of helplessness. A security guard stood near the door. She didn't trust him. Not after what they did to Uncle Isaiah. She'd watched them drag him off the plane like a criminal. He hadn't even raised his voice. Not once. But that didn't matter. He was a large black man on an aircraft where something violent had happened. And that alone was enough to justify handcuffs in their eyes. Avery tried to explain. To the first officer, to the nurse at check-in, even to the woman pushing the mop bucket near the vending machine. He didn't do it. He saved Micah. Nobody listened. They were all too busy asking questions that didn't make sense. Why was the stylus in his hand? Was there a confrontation? Did the child threaten the crew? She wanted to scream. Instead, she whispered to herself, he was drawing clouds. 2 hours passed. No one told her anything. She checked her phone. Still no word from Isaiah. No messages. No updates. She refreshed the news. Nothing. Not yet. But that was about to change. 3 miles across the city, Jasper Rhys sat in his dorm room, eyes bloodshot, fingers trembling as he rewatched the footage he'd captured. His live stream had ended just after touchdown. His battery had died right as the paramedics wheeled Micah away. But the damage was already done. His clip, just 46 seconds long, had already been reposted by 3 major news aggregators. One of them watermarked it with his name. The other cut it and removed audio. The third just let it play. No commentary. No context. Just raw footage of a child being stabbed by a man in uniform. And the silence that followed. Jasper stared at the video again. The disbelief on Micah's face. The moment his body folded inward. The instant Avery screamed. He had tried to edit it. Tried to narrate it. But in the end, the truth didn't need a voiceover. The truth spoke louder than anything he could say. He opened Twitter, typed one sentence. He wasn't a threat. He was 12. Then he uploaded the video. Within 5 minutes, it had 100,000 views. Within 15, it was trending nationwide. Back at the hospital, a nurse finally approached Avery. She looked young. Not much older than Avery herself. Her badge said Maya. "Hi, you're Micah's sister." Avery stood quickly. "Yes. Is he?" "He's stable for now. Still unconscious. They're monitoring him closely. There's a risk of vocal cord trauma. They're not sure if she stopped. Didn't finish the sentence." Avery's eyes welled up again. "Can I see him?" Maya hesitated, then nodded. "This way." They walked slowly through sterile corridors, past quiet corners and vending machines with blinking red lights. Every step echoed. Micah's room was small, dimly lit, the blinds drawn. Machines hummed. Tubes ran across his chest, up his neck, into his nose. He looked smaller than she remembered, like part of him had already let go. She pulled a chair beside him, sat down gently, took his hand in both of hers. "You're still here," she whispered, "and so am I, at the police precinct across town." Isaiah Boone sat alone in a gray-walled interview room. No one had spoken to him for over an hour. A camera blinked red from the corner of the ceiling. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the metal table. His hands were still sticky with dried blood. Eventually, the door creaked open. 2 officers entered, one in plain clothes, the other in uniform. The plainclothes officer sat down. "Mr. Boone, do you want to tell us what happened?" Isaiah stared at him for a long moment. "I already did. We just want to hear it again." "Why?" "So you can twist it." The officer held up a hand. "We're just trying to understand." "No. You're trying to protect the man who did it. We haven't made any determinations about that yet." Isaiah leaned forward. He stabbed a child with a capped stylus. "And your first response was to arrest me. Not him." "Me?" He didn't raise his voice, but the officer still flinched. Back at Sky North Airlines headquarters, a meeting room full of executives sat around a polished oak table, watching the video on loop. No one spoke. The footage was bad, worse than they expected. One man finally broke the silence. "Do we know who filmed this?" A woman across the table replied, "Student. Name's already out. Can't pull it now. Too late." The head of legal leaned forward. "We need to prepare a statement. Blame turbulence? blame confusion, shift it to a training gap. We can't admit fault, not on video, not with a child. What about the flight attendant Frankie Mallon is on paid leave? Legal recommends silence until we assess exposure. Exposure. The word tasted like rust. It wasn't exposure. It was guilt. They just didn't want to say it yet. 1 hour later, news anchors across the country interrupted their programming. Breaking tonight, a Sky North flight is under investigation after a video shows a flight attendant assaulting a black child with what appears to be a stylus pen. The image froze on screen. Micah's wide eyes, Frankie's outstretched arm, blood soaking into the seatbelt, in the hospital room. Avery heard the voice from the television mounted in the corner. She looked up, stared at the screen. Micah's face stared back. Her breath caught. Then something broke loose inside her. Not grief, not fear. Something louder. Anger. Isaiah was finally released an hour later. No apology, no explanation. Just silence and a printed statement that said pending investigation. He took a cab straight to the hospital. When he saw Micah, he stopped at the doorway. His body tensed. But then Avery looked up and nodded. He's still here, and so are we. Jasper's inbox exploded with media requests. CNN, MSNBC, local outlets, civil rights groups. He didn't answer any of them. He just posted one more thing. His name is Micah Benton. He was drawing clouds. Jasper Rhys had never imagined that a simple act of recording would change everything. Sitting in his small college apartment, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups, Jasper replayed the video on his phone for what felt like the 100th time. The raw footage of Micah Benton, the boy who had been stabbed mid-flight, was no longer just a clip. It had become a symbol, a spark, a call to action for thousands. He glanced at the comments flooding in from across the country. People were angry, heartbroken, demanding answers. Some called for justice. Others shared their own stories of discrimination and pain. Jasper had expected his live stream to be important, but not like this, not a wildfire that no one could contain. Still, Jasper felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was part of something much larger. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Avery Benton. It read simply, "Thank you." That short message hit him harder than anything else. He hadn't met Avery, but through the screen, he felt connected to her pain and determination. The day began with a press conference called by Sky North Airlines at their headquarters. Jasper watched it live, feeling a knot twist in his stomach. Executives stood behind a podium, their faces carefully composed, their words carefully measured. The company expressed regret for an unfortunate incident, but insisted they were conducting a thorough internal investigation. They reassured the public that safety and respect were top priorities, but their voices didn't reach the people watching. Not really. The video Jasper had captured told a different story. Outside the building, hundreds gathered in protest. Signs waved with messages like "Justice for Micah," "Not a threat," and "Flight attendant should be fired." Their voices rose in chants that echoed down city streets and into the hearts of those listening. Avery stood among them, holding a homemade sign, her eyes fierce. Isaiah was beside her, his usual quiet strength now amplified by the raw pain of seeing his nephew hurt and the system attempting to silence them. Inside the hospital, Micah's condition remained critical. Doctors worked tirelessly, but the injury was severe. There was a chance he might lose the ability to speak, a possibility that terrified Avery and Isaiah alike. They sat beside his bed, holding his hands, silently praying for any sign of improvement. Meanwhile, Jasper received an unexpected call from a local news station. "Would you be willing to speak on camera?" the producer asked. "Your video has gone viral, and people want to hear your story." Jasper hesitated. He was shy, a student, not a public figure. But then he thought about Micah and Avery, and what staying silent might mean. "Yes," he said, "I'll do it." When the day of the interview came, Jasper's voice was steady as he recounted what he had seen on Flight 227. He described Micah as a gentle boy who loved to draw, a child who posed no threat but was treated like one anyway. He spoke of the moment Frankie Mallon had taken the stylus and, without provocation, stabbed Micah in the neck. He talked about the frantic attempts to erase evidence, the airline's attempt to control the narrative, and the overwhelming silence that followed the incident. His words stirred something in viewers. The empathy was palpable. Comments flooded social media, demanding accountability and reform. Avery saw the interview. She watched Jasper speak for Micah when he couldn't. She felt a flicker of hope. Maybe their voices would finally be heard. But the fight was far from over. Sky North's legal team went into overdrive, issuing statements denying the severity of the incident, questioning the motives of the passengers who spoke out, and attempting to discredit Jasper's video as misleading and taken out of context. The airline's PR machine worked overtime, trying to steer the conversation away from the stark reality of what had happened. Yet, public pressure only grew. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning the violence and the systemic failures that allowed it. Lawmakers called for hearings and investigations. The story dominated headlines for days, refusing to fade. Avery received messages from strangers offering support and sharing stories of their own struggles with discrimination and injustice. She was overwhelmed but determined. She knew that fighting for Micah was not just about one boy or one flight attendant. It was about confronting a system that had long allowed children like Micah to be ignored, mistreated, and silenced. One evening, after a long day at the hospital, Avery sat by Micah's bedside. His breathing was steady, and his eyes fluttered open for the first time in days. She reached out, gently holding his hand. He looked at her, confused and weak. Avery smiled through tears. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're fighting for you." In that moment, the silence between them was filled with unspoken promises. Back in his dorm room, Jasper reflected on how far the story had come. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. But he also knew that sometimes courage meant simply refusing to look away. The early morning sun filtered through the blinds of Baxter Langley's downtown office, casting long shadows across the walls lined with legal books and framed degrees. Baxter sat at his desk, a tall, lean man with salt and pepper hair and eyes that missed nothing. His fingers tapped rhythmically on a stack of documents spread before him. In the chair across from him sat Isaiah Boone, looking worn but resolute. Alongside Isaiah were Avery Benton and Aria Moss. The Benton family's attorney, a woman whose calm voice carried the weight of conviction. They had gathered for what would become a turning point in their fight for justice. Baxter cleared his throat. "What we have here," he said, sliding a small digital recorder across the table, "is a recording that the airline tried desperately to bury." Aria leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "This was recovered through a whistleblower." "Yes," Baxter confirmed. "An employee who couldn't stay silent any longer." The recording was made the evening before Flight 227 took off. Isaiah's fists clenched in his lap. "What does it say?" Baxter pressed play. The voices crackled softly through the small speaker. "I don't want another junior hero incident," Frankie Mallon's voice sneered. We've got to check him at the gate before he tries anything." "Got it," replied a second voice, sharp and female. "I'll tell Valeria to handle the gate crew." Laughter echoed in the background. "That kid's a marker set waiting to happen," Frankie continued, the bitterness unmistakable. "Should have used the back end of the stylus last time." Arya's jaw tightened. "This is beyond negligence. This is premeditation." Avery stared at the recorder, her eyes glassy with tears she refused to shed. They knew who Micah was before he even boarded. Isaiah nodded slowly. They planned it. The room fell silent. Baxter finally spoke. "This tape changes everything. We're not just fighting an assault charge anymore. We're uncovering a culture of discrimination and intimidation." Days later, the tape leaked to the media. News anchors replayed the damning audio over and over, their voices a mix of shock and condemnation. Across the country, civil rights organizations demanded a federal investigation. SkyNorth Airlines stock plummeted as investors panicked. Board members called emergency meetings behind closed doors. Frankie Mallon was placed on indefinite suspension, but no apology came from the company. No admission of guilt. Only a carefully worded statement expressing deep regret and commitment to review policies. Meanwhile, in hospital rooms and city squares, Avery and Isaiah found themselves at the center of a storm. Protesters gathered outside SkyNorth's headquarters, their chants echoing through the streets. Justice for Micah. No more silence. Inside the Benton family home, Micah began therapy sessions to regain his voice and motor skills. His first clear word came after months of struggle, Avery. That word was a beacon, a promise, a reminder. Back at the law office, Baxter worked tirelessly, coordinating with forensic analysts and civil rights experts. He filed motions to subpoena internal communications, personnel records, and training materials. The airline fought back, citing privacy and corporate confidentiality. But Judge Langley, known for his no-nonsense rulings, approved the requests. In the courtroom, Arya presented evidence piece by piece. Reports of passengers of color being unfairly targeted, complaints about hostile treatment ignored or buried, and patterns of intimidation that painted a damning picture. The defense attempted to discredit witnesses, question motives, and sought to divert attention. But the public's eyes were wide open now. Jasper Rhys continued to document the unfolding drama, his social media channels a vital source of information and solidarity. One evening, as Avery sat by Micah's bedside, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Senator Elaine Dray, a fierce advocate for justice who had taken up the Benton family's cause. "We're drafting new legislation," the message read, "the Keon Benton Aviation Protection Act. It will require body cameras for flight crews and stricter oversight." Avery smiled through tears. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, hope glimmered. Micah's story was not just a tragedy. It was a movement, a reckoning, a chance to change the rules. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with expectation and unspoken pain. Every eye was fixed on the witness stand where Micah Benton sat, smaller than anyone expected, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the arms of the chair. It had been months since the stabbing on Flight 227, but the memory still weighed heavily in the room. Avery sat just a few feet away, her fingers intertwined, her eyes never leaving her brother. Isaiah stood silently in the back, a pillar of strength despite the exhaustion written across his face. The judge, Edward Langley, called the court to order. The jury, a diverse group chosen with care, settled into their seats, their expressions a mix of curiosity and solemnity. Arya Moss, the Benton family's attorney, stepped forward, Her voice was calm but commanding as she addressed the court. "Today," she began, "we will hear from the victim, a 12-year-old boy whose life was forever changed by an act of violence that should never have happened." Micah's synthetic voice aid rested on a small table in front of him, blinking softly. The device would speak for him today. His words filtered through technology, but no less powerful. Arya looked gently at Micah. "Whenever you're ready." Micah's eyes flickered open. He took a slow, deliberate breath. Then the machine spoke in a clear, mechanical tone. "I was drawing, just drawing the clouds. Then the man took my pen. He stabbed me." A hush fell over the courtroom. The words hung in the air, simple but devastating. Arya continued, guiding Micah through his testimony. Each sentence was carefully paced to allow the jury and spectators to absorb the weight of his experience. The boy described the moments before the attack, the fear that gripped him, the confusion and pain. When he recounted the moment the stylus pierced his neck, his mechanical voice trembled slightly, as if the pain had etched itself into the very fibers of the device. Avery's hand found Micah's, squeezing gently. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held her composure. Isaiah's jaw clenched. This was more than a trial. It was a reckoning. When Micah finished, the courtroom erupted into a mix of silent tears and murmurs. The defense attorney rose, attempting to discredit the testimony, suggesting Micah's memory was unreliable due to trauma, but the judge intervened. "The court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances and the use of assistive technology in this testimony," he said firmly. "The evidence will be considered with full weight." Outside the courtroom, protesters gathered once again. The chants of justice for Micah reverberated down the streets. Media crews captured every moment. The story now a national conversation about race, power, and accountability. Inside, the airline's executives watched the proceedings from a glassed-off room. Their faces were pale, strained. The tape they had tried to erase was now etched into public consciousness. Meanwhile, Avery found herself at a crossroads. The fight was no longer just about her brother. It was about every child who might face the same injustice. She began organizing community meetings, connecting with activists, and speaking at rallies. Her voice, once quiet and uncertain, grew strong and unwavering. One afternoon, as she sat beside Micah in the hospital room, he reached out weakly for a glass of orange juice. His fingers brushed against hers. "I'm proud of you," Avery whispered. Micah's eyes met hers, filled with a quiet determination. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but together, they were ready. The courtroom felt like it was shrinking. Every breath was heavier than the last. The murmurs had turned to silence as Baxter Langley prepared to deliver the next piece of evidence, one that could tip the scales irrevocably. Isaiah Boone sat rigid, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Avery's eyes burned red, but her gaze remained steady. Micah, still fragile, watched from his chair with a quiet strength, the voice aid blinking softly like a heartbeat. Baxter cleared his throat and faced the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we are about to hear is the voice that the airline hoped you would never hear." He pressed a button. The courtroom filled with the unmistakable sound of a recording an internal conversation between Frankie Mallon and a supervisor from Sky North Airlines. "I'm telling you, the kid was a problem waiting to happen." Frankie's voice sneered through the speakers. "I warned them at the gate. He was trouble from the start." The supervisor's reply was cold and dismissive. "We can't afford another incident. Keep him in check. Make an example." The words cut through the room like a knife. Arya Moss stepped forward. This recording is proof that Micah was targeted, that his stabbing was not an isolated act but part of a systemic culture of intimidation and discrimination. A collective gasp swept the courtroom. Outside, news vans buzzed with activity. Protesters, now swelling in numbers, marched with renewed vigor. Signs bearing Micah's face and slogans demanding justice filled the city streets. Back inside, the defense attorney scrambled, attempting to challenge the recording's authenticity, but forensic experts testified that the tape was verified, unedited, and unmistakably real. Isaiah exhaled slowly, relief and fury mingling. Avery reached out and took his hand. They were winning the fight, but the scars ran deep. The judge called for a recess. As the courtroom emptied, Avery approached Micah's bedside. "You're doing amazing," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Micah's eyes, filled with pain and hope, met hers. "Will it end?" he asked softly. Avery swallowed. "We're making sure it does." That night, as the city lights flickered below, Jasper Rhys sat alone, watching the news coverage spiral. His phone buzzed messages from supporters, reporters, even strangers inspired by his courage. But with every message came threats, anonymous warnings, hateful words aimed to silence him. Jasper stared at the screen, torn between fear and determination. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was a target, and he knew the fight was far from over. The courtroom was filled with a heavy silence as the trial neared its end. The tension was palpable, every person present feeling the weight of what was at stake. Avery Benton sat beside her uncle Isaiah Boone, hands folded tightly, heart pounding with a mix of exhaustion and hope. Micah, though still fragile, showed quiet resilience. The voice aide sat before him, its soft blinking a small beacon in the otherwise stark room. The defense had made their final arguments attempting to downplay Frankie Mallon's actions, painting Micah as a disruptive child, and accusing the family of exaggeration. But the tide had already turned. The evidence was overwhelming. Baxter Langley rose, his voice steady and clear as he addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not simply about one man's actions. It is about a system that allowed a child to be harmed and then tried to erase the truth." He detailed the internal recordings, the ignored complaints, and the blatant attempts to cover up the incident. Each fact was a nail in the coffin of the defense's narrative. Outside the courtroom, a crowd gathered, their chants of justice for Micah echoing down the street. Reporters streamed live, sharing every moment with the nation. Inside, the jury listened intently, their faces serious. They understood the gravity of their decision. Days passed as they deliberated. For Avery, each hour was a battle against doubt and fear. She visited Micah daily, holding his hand, reminding him that they were fighting not just for a verdict, but for a future where no child would suffer as he did. Isaiah kept a quiet vigil, his presence a steady anchor in a storm of uncertainty. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, the judge called the courtroom to order. The jury had reached a verdict. The room fell silent, breaths held in collective anticipation. The jury foreman stood, clearing his throat. "We find Flight Commander Air guilty of gross negligence and civil rights violations." A murmur of relief rippled through the courtroom. The foreman continued, "We find Frankie Mallon guilty of first-degree aggravated assault and obstruction of justice." The words hit like a thunderclap. Tears welled in Avery's eyes as she reached for Micah's hand. Isaiah's shoulders sagged in exhaustion and relief. Baxter nodded slowly, his expression one of quiet satisfaction tempered by the knowledge of how much work still lay ahead. Outside, The crowd erupted in cheers. News cameras captured the moment, broadcasting it live to millions. But for Avery and Micah, the victory was deeply personal. It was a testament to their strength, to the power of truth, and to the fight that no one should ever face alone. The courtroom was quiet now, emptied of the jury and the echoes of verdicts. Outside, the world moved on. But for the Benton family, the moment was a turning point. Avery sat beside Micah in the hospital room, watching as his fingers traced the pages of a new sketchbook. His hand trembled slightly, but the lines he drew were steady and deliberate. The boy who once feared his own shadow was now reclaiming his voice through art. Isaiah leaned against the doorway, exhaustion evident in the set of his shoulders, but a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "We made it through," Avery whispered, her voice soft but resolute. Micah looked up, his eyes brighter than they had been in months. "Not just us," he replied, the synthetic voice aid capturing the strength behind his words. "For everyone, the road to healing would be long, but the verdict had opened a door to accountability and change." At Sky North Airlines, the fallout was swift and undeniable. The company announced a full internal restructuring. Executives resigned or were replaced. Flight crews underwent mandatory training focused on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation. Most importantly, the airline agreed to implement body cameras for all gate personnel, a first in the industry. But systemic change extended far beyond one company. In Washington, lawmakers introduced the Benton Aviation Safety Act, a bill designed to enforce strict oversight on airline personnel conduct and emergency protocols. Senator Elaine Dray, who had championed the bill since Micah's story broke, spoke passionately about the need for nationwide reform. "This is about protecting every child," she declared at a press conference, "ensuring dignity, respect, and safety for all passengers, regardless of race or background." Avery attended the hearing, sitting alongside advocates and families who had faced similar injustices. Her voice was steady as she shared Micah's story, her call for empathy and reform ringing through the chamber. Back home, the Benton family found solace in community. The Quiet Flame Center, a sanctuary for children affected by trauma, opened its doors with support from donors inspired by Micah's courage. Here, children could explore art, express themselves, and begin the journey toward healing. Micah's drawing class became a beacon of hope. Every stroke of his pen was a testament to resilience, every image a story of survival. Avery continued her advocacy, speaking at schools, organizing rallies, and mentoring young activists. She had found purpose in the pain, a way to transform tragedy into empowerment. Isaiah, once silent in grief, became a pillar for change, advising lawmakers and working with community leaders to dismantle the biases that had nearly destroyed his family. Jasper Rhys, the law student whose camera had captured the truth, graduated with honors and dedicated his career to investigative journalism and civil rights advocacy. His work amplified voices often ignored, shining light on injustice wherever it lurked. The city of Eastbridge commemorated Micah's journey with a bronze statue. In the city square, a boy seated on a bench, stylus raised not as a weapon, but as a symbol of hope. Etched beneath were the words, "Silence does not mean surrender." On the first anniversary of the incident, a gathering of thousands filled the plaza. Avery spoke from the stage, her voice carrying over the crowd. "We came here not to mourn what was lost, but to celebrate what we have gained the power to demand justice, to speak truth, and to never be silenced." Micah, seated beside her, smiled faintly. His eyes reflected the light of a future he was helping to shape. In the quiet moments, Avery often found herself reflecting on how far they had come from that terrifying day on the plain to this moment of collective strength. She knew the fight was far from over, but together they had ignited a flame that would not be extinguished. And for Micah, every line he drew was a step toward reclaiming the world that had tried to break him. The sun rose slowly over Eastbridge, casting a golden light across the city square, where the statue of Micah Benton now stood. The bronze figure captured a boy with a stylus raised high, not as a weapon, but as a beacon, a symbol of resilience and truth. Avery Benton stood quietly before the statue, her fingers tracing the smooth metal surface. Memories flooded her mind, the fear on the plain, the hospital nights, the courtroom battles, and the long, painful road toward justice. She thought of her brother, who once could barely speak, now a source of inspiration for thousands. Micah's voice, though aided by technology, had spoken louder than any courtroom argument or media headline. His story had forced a reckoning, an urgent call to dismantle systems built on bias and silence. Behind Avery, a crowd gathered: families, activists, city officials, and strangers drawn by the story of a boy who refused to be erased. Children held signs with the words, "We deserve to be seen," and dignity for every passenger. The air buzzed with a quiet determination, a collective vow to honor Micah's legacy. Avery stepped onto the makeshift stage, her voice steady and clear. "Micah's story is not just ours," she said. "It belongs to every child who has ever been silenced, every person who has ever been made to feel less than." She paused, looking over the sea of faces. "The legacy of this pen is the power of truth, the courage to stand up, the strength to demand respect." Her words were met with applause, but Avery knew the fight was ongoing. The laws had changed, yes, but hearts and minds would take longer. In classrooms across the nation, educators now taught about bias, empathy, and dignity. Airlines implemented new protocols, but community groups continued to push for deeper change, rooted not just in policy, but in culture. Micah's art adorned the walls of schools and community centers, each piece telling stories of hope, struggle, and the promise of a better tomorrow. At home, Avery and Isaiah watched Micah grow, his voice stronger, his hands steadier. He no longer needed the voice aid for every word. His drawings became more complex, filled with heroes who looked like him, who fought battles not with violence, but with compassion and justice. Jasper Rhys's reporting continued to uncover stories like Micah's, shining light on injustices often hidden in plain sight. His work inspired a new generation of journalists and activists. Senator Elaine Dray's Benton Aviation Safety Act became a model for nationwide reforms, leading to increased oversight and protections for passengers everywhere. As the day faded, Avery knelt beside the statue, placing a small sketchbook at its base. She smiled softly. "This is for you, Micah," she whispered, "for every boy who ever held a pen and dared to dream." The legacy of that day, the day a flight attendant stabbed a boy with a pen, was no longer just a story of pain. It was a story of power, perseverance, and profound change. And as the city settled into the quiet of evening, Avery knew one thing for certain: silence would never be their surrender. Micah Benton's story is more than a tragedy. It is a powerful reminder of the damage caused by fear, prejudice, and silence. Behind every headline is a child who deserved safety, respect, and dignity through the courage of a family, the witness of one law student, and the unwavering fight for justice. We see what happens when love and truth refuse to be silenced. But this is also a call to all of us to challenge discrimination wherever it hides, to stand with those who are vulnerable, and to demand accountability from the systems that fail too many. Every pen, every voice, every story matters. Because justice is not just about punishment. It's about ensuring no one else has to face such pain alone. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us for more powerful narratives that expose injustice, celebrate resilience, and inspire change. Together, we can create a world where every child's voice is heard and protected. Thank you for watching. Your support means the world. Let's keep fighting together.